The general, a man whose word once held the weight of mountains, looked down at me from the stage, his voice amplified across the parade ground. "Walt Jensen," he boomed, "you are hereby stripped of your rank." My chest, once solid, felt hollow. He leaned into the mic, a cold smirk twitching his lips. "Consider yourself a civilian, a very, very loose end." The rough ropes bit into my wrists, pulled taut to the ceiling. My bare feet, swollen and cold, scraped the dirt floor with each involuntary spasm. The rats, emboldened by the dark, continued their work on my ankles, their tiny claws a familiar, irritating rhythm. Another night in this godforsaken cell. My body was a wreck, sure, but my mind? That part remained clear. Sharpened to a fine point by the endless waiting, the quiet hum of foreign guards just outside the rusted door. I cursed under my breath, a low, guttural sound that dissolved into the stale air. This ain't how it was supposed to end, not for a Marine like me. Not for someone who'd seen things, done things, always landed on his feet. The irony of it all gnawed at me harder than any rat. Here I was, cornered and broken, while a part of me, a deeper part, still fought, still thought of home. Home was a small cabin, tucked away in the pine-scented mountains outside Leadville, Colorado. It was a neat place, functional, like everything else in my life. The air there was thin and clean, the kind that filled your lungs and scrubbed them raw. Between deployments, that cabin was where I found a fleeting peace, a temporary reprieve from the dust and the noise. I'd run the trails, pushing myself until my lungs burned, trying to stay sharp, trying to outrun the strange unease that had settled over the place. A feeling like a storm brewing, just beyond the ridge. Then came the news. Frank Riley, my old partner, was retiring, and my new partner, Sarah Miller, General Hayes' daughter. I remember the call, the way my jaw tightened. Figured she was just Daddy's little challenge, a paper doll they wanted to break in or parade around. I'd seen enough of that to last a lifetime. My skepticism ran deep, a cold stone in my gut. I pushed for 2 months of grueling training, the kind that broke lesser men. I put her through the paces, the obstacle courses, the forced marches at altitude, secretly hoping she'd wash out, prove she wasn't cut out for it. It was a cruel thing, perhaps, but I believed in hard truths. You either made the call or you didn't. There was no in-between when lives were on the line. Just before my next deployment, the restless energy had gotten to me. I signed up for the Leadville Trail 100, a 100-mile race through the mountains, a way to clear my head, to push out the noise. Old habits die hard. I ran with minimal gear, just what I needed, an old-school Marine sticking to his roots. At the starting line, the pre-dawn chill biting at my exposed skin, I spotted her. Sarah. She was dressed just like me, the same sparse gear, the same lean, purposeful stance. Her violet eyes, sharper than I remembered, fixed on me from across the crowd, like something out of a dream or a bad omen. She walked right up, her steps precise, cutting through the murmuring crowd, extended a hand, a no-nonsense grin on her face. "Sergeant Major, I reckon." I was stunned, taken off guard by her directness, by her presence here. "Ma'am," I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. My hand met hers, a brief, firm grip. She didn't let it go right away. Her eyes, unwavering, held mine. "What kind of grip was that?" she said, her voice low, challenging. "Thought you were a Marine." Before I could answer, the starting gun cracked through the cold morning air. Sarah didn't hesitate. She bolted, merging with the surge of runners, shouting back over her shoulder, her voice surprisingly clear above the commotion. "If you're a real Marine, you'll catch me." Her pace was relentless. Up the first climb, she moved like she had springs in her heels. She'd bark blunt commands at other runners who blocked her path. "No, excuse me, just move." I struggled to keep up, annoyed, but against my will, grudgingly impressed. She ain't one to ask nicely, I thought, pushing harder, the altitude beginning to burn in my chest. Despite myself, I had to admit, she was faster than I thought. The trail turned steeper, the terrain grew harsher, but she just dug in, her form unwavering. A flicker of something that might have been respect, or at least a grudging acknowledgement, began to form. The memory, vivid and jarring, faded. The chill of the cell, the gnawing pain in my ankles, pulled me back to this desperate reality. Sarah. She was the one I despised, the one I tried to break. And now she was the key to all of this. I felt the walls closing in, the relentless hunt, a premonition of my own end, yet a flicker of her unforeseen role, a ghost in the periphery. Everything was gone now. My home, I knew, was a ruin. All that was left was a cold, burning rage. They thought I was prey. They don't know what they've unleashed. The next 2 months were a blur of thin air, burning lungs, and the relentless grind of training. I pushed Sarah harder than I had pushed anyone. Miles of trail runs through the unforgiving Colorado mountains, obstacle courses designed to break resolve, simulated combat drills that left you bruised and gasping. I watched for the crack, the moment she'd complain, the sign she'd fold. It never came. She matched my intensity, never once asking for a break, never complaining about the altitude sickness that turned other recruits pale. Her face, often streaked with dirt and sweat, held a steady, quiet determination. She had a way of looking at you, those violet eyes, that made you feel she understood something you weren't saying, or maybe that she saw through your act. I started to see she was more than just General Hayes' daughter. She was a soldier, plain and simple, and she earned every step she took. There were quiet moments too. After a particularly brutal 16-mile run, we'd sit on a rock, catching our breath, the only sounds the wind through the pines and the thumping of our own hearts. Sometimes she'd offer a canteen or just a nod. Small things. One afternoon she asked me about the cabin, how long I'd been up in the mountains, comments. I kept my answers short, factual. Just me, for years. The solitude out there, she said, was something she couldn't imagine. I just grunted. But those brief, uncharacteristic conversations, sparse as they were, slowly chipped away at the armor I'd worn for so long. I went back to the cabin for a couple of days just to check on things, clean my gear. The solitude was a stark contrast to Sarah's constant presence during training. The place felt different now. The quiet, usually a comfort, had a strange new edge to it, like a note held too long. Then Frank Riley called. My old partner. So how's the general's kid working out, Walt? He asked, his voice gravelly over the line. I could almost hear the grin. I paused, picking my words carefully. She's all right, I said, trying to keep my tone flat. Frank chuckled. Just all right? You don't sound like yourself, Walt. She ain't bad, huh? He knew me too well. I sighed, a puff of air escaping my lips. She's got a set of lungs on her, I admitted, a grudging measure of praise. And she don't quit. She's got grit. I'll give her direction that. It was as close to a compliment as Frank would ever get from me about a new partner. He laughed again, a knowing sound. An unspoken tension had grown between Sarah and me. It wasn't hostile anymore, not strictly professional rivalry. It was something else, hanging in the air like the scent of pine after a rain. Hard to place, but definitely there, a quiet hum. Then the orders came in. Deployment. The reality of our mission, the dust and heat of a foreign land, loomed large, pushing everything else into the background. This was the reason we trained, the reason we pushed. The night before we left, we found ourselves in a greasy diner off base, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like asphalt. The conversation was clipped, practical, gear checks, mission parameters, logistics, nothing personal. But our eyes would linger a beat too long, catching each other across the Formica table before snapping back to the chipped sugar dispenser or the salt shaker. She looked out the window at the passing cars, then turned back to me. Must be quiet out there, she said, her voice soft. All alone in that cabin? I just shrugged, stirring my coffee, not looking up. Gets the job done. Internally, though, I acknowledged it. I wouldn't be alone on this tour, not really. Sarah had earned her place, every inch of it. I'd never say it aloud, of course. My pride, my Marine discipline, wouldn't allow it. But the thought was there. Sometimes in the long silences, I found myself thinking about her more than I should. It was a fleeting thing, a quick image of her face, her steady eyes. Then I'd push it away, back to the dusty corners of my mind. A ghost of a thought, of a quiet wife waiting back home if there even was one, or if that life was already unraveling. The familiar weight of my Marine oath settled quickly, heavy and undeniable, pushing aside any stray personal feelings. Duty first. Always. The final packing. The quick, silent goodbyes to no one in particular. The empty barracks. We headed out into the unknown. A new chapter for both of us, entwined now by fate and circumstance, ready for whatever the sand and the distant sun held. The desert stretched out, flat and unforgiving, under a sky that bleached everything to pale white. Sarah and I moved like shadows, a single fluid unit. 2 months of Colorado training, amplified by the harsh reality of active duty, had honed us into an effective team. My instincts led, hers followed, or vice versa. A hand signal, a quick glance, and we anticipated each other's next move before it was made. We were a well-oiled machine, quiet and deadly. Then the ambush, a sudden burst of gunfire from a hidden position, the crack echoing off the ancient stone walls of a market alley. I felt the familiar burn of adrenaline, the world narrowing to a pinpoint focus. My rifle snapped up, but before I could squeeze the trigger, a flash of movement. Sarah, low and fast, shoved me hard to the side. The bullet, meant for my head, punched into the mud wall where I had been a split second before, kicking up dust and debris. "Stay down," she hissed, already covering our flank, her weapon spitting fire. My heart hammered against my ribs. A debt. A deep, cold debt I felt down to my bones. The profound shift in my perception of her was immediate, undeniable. She wasn't just my partner. She was the one who had just saved my life. We cleared the alley, the silence that followed heavier than the gunfire. The rush of adrenaline faded, replaced by a quiet, heavy relief. We exchanged a look, a glance held a little too long, a silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between us. No words were needed. The air crackled with it. Later that week back at the base, I made a call home. My wife, Mary, in Ohio. The connection was scratchy, distant, like talking through a thick wall. "Just checking in, Mary," I said, trying to inject some warmth into my voice, but it came out flat. "Everything all right back home?" Her voice was polite, preoccupied. She talked about the garden, the grocery store, the weather. Small things. She didn't ask about me, not really. I avoided details, the danger, the dust. It was always like this. We moved in separate orbits, connected by habit more than anything else. Sarah, leaning against the wall of the comms tent, nursing a cup of stale coffee, watched me. When I hung up, she pushed off the wall. "Sounds like a long-distance conversation," she said, her voice quiet. "Not a call home." I bristled, a quick flash of irritation. "It's fine," I said, brushing her off. "Different time zones, you know." But her words echoed a quiet truth. I thought of Mary, the routine of our lives back home, the slow, imperceptible drift that had taken us miles apart, the intense proximity, the shared danger, the constant awareness of each other in a world stripped bare of pretense. It began to blur the lines, subtle at first. A hand brushing an arm a beat too long, a lingering gaze across a dusty room. The world outside the wire, the lives we had, felt like a distant dream. I grappled with it, this growing attraction. It was a silent battle waged in the confines of my own head. This ain't right. I got a life back home. Duty, loyalty, the ingrained Marine code, all fought against the quiet pull I felt towards Sarah. One night, a brief respite from the relentless missions. We found ourselves alone in a small, secure room, the dull hum of the generator providing the only background noise. We talked, not about the mission, but about our lives, our pasts. She spoke of her own quiet loneliness, the pressure of being General Hayes' daughter, the constant need to prove herself beyond her name, beyond her lineage. I found myself telling her about the cabin, about growing up in a small Midwestern town, the quiet rhythms of a life that felt a million miles away. We revealed vulnerabilities, cracks in our armor. Then a hesitant, almost accidental physical contact. My hand, reaching for a map, brushed hers. A shared laugh at some mundane observation. A moment of unguarded intimacy. A fragile space between us that solidified, became real. A seed was planted. The idea of an affair, a fleeting escape from the hard reality of our lives, From the suffocating expectations and quiet disappointments took root. It was unspoken, a palpable thing that hung between us, heavy and warm. The next mission arrived with the dawn, pulling us back into our professional roles, the uniforms, the weapons, the grim purpose, but the undercurrent had changed. The air around us, between us, was charged with a new, dangerous electricity. A pang of guilt, a whisper of betrayal settled in my gut, even before anything explicit had happened. What am I doing? The thought was a sharp jab. This new emotional terrain, I realized, felt more dangerous than any battlefield, more treacherous than any enemy I had faced. The remote outpost was a collection of sandbags, tents, and prefabricated shelters baking under a relentless sun. Nights were cold, stark. The boundaries between Sarah and me, already blurred, began to fully erode. One particular night, the wind howling outside, the canvas walls of our shared sleeping area flapping like sails. The chill seeped into our bones. Without a word, she moved from her cot to mine. Comfort was sought and comfort was given. The air grew heavy with unspoken desires. A kiss, tentative at first, then deeper. A raw expression of need and shared vulnerability, tasted of dust and desperation. We established a silent code, a series of quick glances, subtle gestures, a way to move around each other that conveyed intimacy without words. The rest of the unit, wrapped in their own exhaustion and focus, seemed oblivious. The thrill of the forbidden, sharp and dangerous, mixed with a growing sense of dread, a knot tightening in my gut. My emotional turmoil was a constant low hum. With Sarah, there was an immediacy, an understanding born of shared peril that Mary, back in Ohio, could never grasp. Mary was a fading photograph, a distant memory of a life that felt increasingly disconnected from the man I was becoming here. A phone call from Mary confirmed my fears. Her voice, usually soft, was sharper, more probing. "Who is this Sarah?" she asked, a sudden edge to her tone. "You talk about her a lot when you call. Is she your new partner?" My stomach clenched. I fumbled for words, offering vague, clipped responses, trying to sound normal, casual. "She's just a soldier, Mary. My partner. Nothing more." My guilt, a heavy cloak, made me clumsy. "We trained together, worked together. That's all." Sarah, often within earshot during my calls, observed my struggles. She never commented, never interfered, but I could feel her presence, her quiet understanding. Perhaps she sensed my conflict, but her own longing, the unspoken needs that had drawn us together, kept her from pulling back. She didn't press. One quiet afternoon, sharing a bottle of warm water in the shade of a Humvee, I almost confessed, almost told her about Mary, about the routine of our marriage, the slow, silent drift. The words were on my tongue, a heavy weight. But I stopped myself. Some things are best left unsaid, I thought. The familiar Marine discipline kicking in. You don't air your dirty laundry, especially not here. Our clandestine meetings became bolder, driven by passion, yes, but also by the oppressive environment, the constant gnawing presence of danger. The need for even a fleeting escape was overwhelming. We sought out abandoned supply tents, the far side of the perimeter wall under the cover of night. Each encounter was charged not just with illicit desire, but with the palpable risk of discovery. There was a close call, one that stopped my heart. Maureen Jenkins, a loudmouthed kid from Texas, almost caught us coming out of a storage shed after sundown. We froze, playing it off like we were doing a quick perimeter check. He just grunted, not looking too closely, and kept walking. The fear, cold and sharp, was palpable. It added another layer of intensity to what we were doing, but also a stark reminder of the high stakes. My career, Sarah's reputation, my family back home. Everything could unravel. Sarah, her face usually unreadable, seemed to accept the risks with a quiet determination. "We knew what this was, Walt," she said once, after a near miss, her eyes steady on mine. A simple statement, yet it carried the weight of a shared understanding. The affair, I realized, had become an escape from the horrors of war, the relentless pressure, the constant threat of death, but also an escape from the growing emptiness of my marriage, from the silent disappointment that had become our default setting. I made a vague, self-serving promise to myself, a whisper in the back of my mind, that I'd fix things with Mary when I got home. Even as I deepened the betrayal with every touch, every stolen moment with Sarah, the burden of my secret, the weight of deceit, started to weigh on me. It made me withdrawn, even from Sarah at times. The constant vigilance, the lies, the double life. It was exhausting. Then the focus shifted. A critical operation was coming up, a major push into enemy territory. The mission, dangerous and complex, created a new layer of tension, a stark reminder that our personal drama was secondary to the grim reality of our purpose. The stakes, already high, were about to get higher. The air was thick with the scent of cordite and dust. We were in the thick of it, a critical mission to secure an old factory compound on the outskirts of an unnamed town. Walt and Sarah moved with a practiced, brutal grace. Every breach, every cover, every shot was a testament to their honed professional prowess. They were in sync, a single, relentless force against the unseen enemy. Then the firefight erupted, a sudden, furious explosion of gunfire from all sides. Rounds whizzed past, digging into the crumbling brick. Walt pushed Sarah behind a low wall, laying down suppressive fire. She responded, her rifle spitting tracers, covering him as he repositioned. Their bond, forged in fire, was all that mattered in that moment. Amidst the chaos, a garbled message squawked through my comms. Static, then a voice, urgent, frantic. Sergeant Major, urgent, from home. Mary, she knows. The words were fragmented, almost lost in the din of battle, but the meaning hit me like a physical blow, even amidst the explosions. My two worlds collided, violently, sickeningly. The world crumbled. A flashback, sharp and vivid, seared through the haze of battle, Mary's face contorted with fury and heartbreak. It must have been that email, that one I forgot to delete, the one Sarah had sent with innocuous mission updates, but whose timing, after my last leave, painted a different picture? Or maybe the phone bill, the unusual number of calls to the base, her voice echoing in my mind. How could you, Walt? After everything, the image of my family shattering, the trust destroyed. My carefully constructed life revealed as a lie. Sarah, ever perceptive, noticed my sudden, distant demeanor. My movements grew sluggish. My aim wavered. "It's Walt," she yelled over the gunfire, trying to reach me. But I was unresponsive, haunted, lost in the wreckage of my home. In that fog, I made a critical error. A doorway I should have checked, a flank I left exposed. A burst of enemy fire erupted. Too close, ripping into the wall next to me. Before I could react, Sarah moved, pulling me violently from the brink, pushing me back against the wall, her own rifle covering the threat. Her eyes, usually so focused on the enemy, now fixed on me, questioning but resolute. After the immediate threat subsided, a brief lull in the fighting, she grabbed my arm, forcing me to look at her. "What was that, Walt?" Her voice was low, strained. "You checked out. What's going on?" The words tumbled out, raw and ragged. "Mary, she knows." Sarah was stunned. Her face, usually so composed, showed a flicker of hurt, then hardened with a firm resolve. "Knows about what? About us?" She didn't wait for an answer. "What happens now, Walt? What about us?" I was forced to consider the real, immediate cost of my actions. Not just on my marriage, which was clearly incinerated, but on my career, my standing, and this fragile, complicated partnership with Sarah. There were no easy answers out here, no safe harbor from the storm I had unleashed. I was caught between my commitment to Sarah and the wreckage of my marriage. A cold, creeping suspicion began to form. Mary's discovery had been too precise, too sudden. The urgent message amidst the firefight, almost like it was timed, a hint that her discovery might have been orchestrated or amplified by someone else, an outside force that knew about the affair and used it. A new kind of enemy, not on the battlefield, but a war on my home front, fueled by my own choices, and now by something else entirely. If you're wondering what happens next, if Walt can navigate this treacherous path between love, war, and betrayal, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. We returned to base, the mission accomplished, but the victory tasted like ash. The tension between Sarah and me was a palpable thing, a thick, suffocating blanket that settled over every shared glance, every hushed conversation. The danger outside the wire felt almost preferable to the cold internal war now raging. Then came the formal message, forwarded through official channels. Not a call, not even a letter, but a stark, impersonal email from a lawyer's office in Ohio. Divorce papers. A clear statement that my old life was over, punctuated by Mary's brittle voice on a subsequent, reluctant call. Don't bother coming home, Walt. There's nothing left for you here. The words were like a flat line on a monitor, signaling the death of a long-fading connection. My commanders, subtle at first, then more direct, began to question my fitness for duty. My distracted performance during the last mission hadn't gone unnoticed, and the whispers about the affair, insidious and quick-spreading, had reached their ears. My stellar record, once a shield, was now tarnished, scratched by rumor and official concern. Sarah, though, remained steadfast. She was there, a quiet strength, a silent promise of loyalty. Her hand on my arm, a fleeting look in her eyes that said, I'm here, Walt, whatever happens. It was a comfort, a lifeline in the deepening chaos, but I spiraled. Guilt gnawed at me, raw and constant. Anger flared, quick and hot, at Mary, at myself, at the invisible forces that seemed to be closing in. Despair settled, heavy and cold. My focus faltered. My discipline, once unyielding, loosened its grip. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by restless nights replaying mistakes. The inevitable confrontation with General Hayes came in his sterile office. His face, usually a mask of calm authority, was etched with cold fury. He didn't shout, but his voice was a whip crack. You jeopardized my daughter in this unit, Jensen, and you dishonored yourself. He stared at me, his eyes like chips of ice. Do you understand the implications of your actions, Sergeant at Major? I understood. The full weight of the brass was coming down. It began to click then, the pieces of a larger puzzle. The affair wasn't just a personal failing, a momentary lapse. It was a weakness, exploited. The smoking ruin of my home, the suddenness of Mary's discovery, it all started to make more sense. Someone was playing a long game, using my personal life as a weapon. A few days later, a seemingly random security breach was reported. Sensitive intelligence files, briefly exposed. Doubt was cast on my unit, then subtly, insidiously, on me. It felt too convenient, too precise. Someone was pulling strings, weaving a web. The hunt, I realized, wasn't just for the enemy outside the wire. Someone here, or connected to here, was playing a dangerous game. Someone's playing a long game, I thought. The cold truth settling. One night, the weight of it all became too much. I found myself in Sarah's tent, the canvas offering little privacy. I shared my deepest fears, the feeling of being hunted, of everything unraveling, not just my career, but my entire life. She listened, her expression unwavering. When I finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes. Her voice was low, firm. Then we figure it out, together. Her loyalty, despite the personal cost she was undoubtedly paying, was unwavering. The loss of trust was palpable. My fellow Marines, once a tight-knit brotherhood, started to look at me differently. Whispers followed me, judging, questioning. The easy camaraderie was fractured, replaced by a cautious distance. The news from home, relayed by a sympathetic friend, confirmed my fears. The affair had been made public in my hometown, bringing shame and scandal to Mary and my family. The headlines, the gossip, the quiet judgment from neighbors. My choices had reverberated far beyond my own life, touching everyone I had once held dear. The burden of consequences. I was truly paying the price, not just for my own mistakes, but for all those around me, for the damage I'd inflicted. But amidst the despair, a glimmer of purpose ignited. The need to clear my name, to understand who was orchestrating my downfall, became a new, grim focus. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, uncovering the truth behind the whispers on the wind. The military base, once a place of order and purpose, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and hidden agendas. Sarah and I began our own quiet investigation, sifting through the wreckage of my personal life in the string of suspicious incidents. We worked in hushed tones late into the nights, poring over old mission reports, communication logs, anything that seemed out of place. The first thread we pulled led to Mary. a surprising, chilling link between her discovery of the affair and a specific intelligence leak related to one of our recent missions. No accident, Sarah murmured, her brow furrowed, tracing a finger over a date on a timeline. Someone fed her the information, and they timed it. The realization hit me hard. My private life wasn't just exposed, it had been weaponized. We started seeing the patterns. Small, seemingly innocuous events coalescing into a treacherous web. We uncovered evidence of a deeper conspiracy, not just a mole, but a shadowy organization that seemed to operate just outside the official lines, exploiting vulnerabilities within the military itself. They benefited from chaos, from discrediting Marine operations, from turning success into failure. General Hayes, Sarah's father, unknowingly might have been a pawn. His righteous anger over the affair, his very public reprimand of me, had served as a perfect diversion, drawing attention away from the real threat festering within. He had been so focused on my perceived betrayal that he missed the larger, far more dangerous one. The full scope of the manipulation dawned on me. My affair wasn't just a mistake, a personal failing born of loneliness and proximity. It was a tool, a carefully placed charge designed to detonate and bring down everything around me. They wanted to neutralize me, and they used my own weaknesses to do it. Sarah, in those tense weeks, took a professional hit. She covered for my errors, deflected accusations, and even took some direct blame for logistical oversights. It was a silent, profound sacrifice, further cementing her loyalty, not just to me, but to the truth we were trying to uncover. She was risking her career, her name. For this, I had to confront my own moral failings. The hubris that led me to believe I could compartmentalize my life, keep my personal messes separate from my professional duties. It was a lie, a delusion. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about acknowledging how deeply I had compromised myself, how easily I had become an unwitting asset in their game. Then came the confirmation about the cabin. Frank Riley, my old partner, called with a hushed report. "Walt," he said, his voice grim, "your place outside Leadville. It wasn't an accident. They torched it. Clean." Mom, my stomach dropped. They weren't just after me. They wanted to erase everything I had. The smoking ruin was a message burned into the Colorado landscape. Piece by piece, we identified a key player. A faction within a foreign intelligence service, working with disgruntled elements back home, fueled by a deep-seated desire to destabilize our operations, to sow distrust. They benefited from every perceived failure, every scandal. We devised a desperate, risky plan to expose them. It meant going outside official channels, moving in the shadows, potentially sacrificing our own careers, our freedom. There was no going back. We reached out to Frank Riley again, this time with a full download of everything we had. He was a grizzled veteran, retired but still connected, still driven by a fierce sense of justice. He listened, his face grim. "They messed with the wrong damn Marine, Walt," he said, his voice low. "Count me in." He offered clandestine support, back channels, a safe house if we needed it. The enemy, however, was not slow. They realized what was on to them. Their efforts to neutralize me escalated, shifting from subtle manipulation to direct action. They knew I was a threat, a loose end. This escalation, this tightening of the net, led directly to my capture. The night I ended up in this cell, bound and broken, was no random event. It was a carefully orchestrated trap, sprung with brutal efficiency. They wanted to silence me, to protect their operation, to ensure their truth, their lies, remained unchallenged. The rope still bit into my wrists, the rats still gnawed. But the pain, dulled by days of repetition, now served as a backdrop for the vivid playback loop in my mind. The night of my capture. I remembered the cold snap of the ambush, the sudden rush of figures from the shadows, the swift, precise blow to my head. Then the sweet, cloying smell of chloroform, the world tilting, dissolving into darkness. The interrogations followed. Not the brutal, blunt force I might have expected, but a calculated, insidious probing. They didn't want confessions of guilt. They wanted confirmation of my knowledge. Had I seen too much? Did I know the extent of the conspiracy? The names, the players? I remained silent, a stone in their path. Each lash, each jab of pain only sharpened my resolve. There was a new, grim purpose now, a burning clarity. My focus narrowed to Sarah and Frank, their faces clear in the dim light of my memory. Our last desperate plan, the evidence we'd gathered, the risks we'd prepared for. I had to trust they were carrying it out, putting the pieces together, exposing the conspirators. They were the last hope. I remembered Frank Riley, his face etched with years of hard decisions, a man of quiet, unwavering integrity. Walt, he'd said, his voice low over the crackling phone, the real enemies, they ain't always wearing uniforms. Sometimes they're in suits, in offices. They play a different kind of war. And betrayal, son, that always cuts deepest when it comes from inside the wire. His words, once a warning, now felt like prophecy. I thought of General Hayes, Sarah's father, a man of honor, yes, but blinded by his own rigid code, manipulated by forces he couldn't see. He was a pawn, just like me, his reputation now also in ruins, albeit for different reasons. The true enemies, the ones who orchestrated my downfall, were not the ones I faced on the battlefield. They were closer to home. A specific conversation with Sarah echoed in my head. We were poring over files, connecting the dots. It's always the ones you don't expect, she'd said, her finger tracing a name on a leaked document. The ones who benefit when the dust settles, when the good guys are fighting each other. The betrayal from within, the cold, sickening truth of it. My rage, a low, constant simmer, now began to boil. The memory of my cabin, the smoking ruin Frank had described, ignited a furious heat in my gut. My broken life, my shattered family. They didn't just want me out of the way, they wanted to erase everything I had. It was personal now, deeply, viciously personal. I embraced the idea of becoming a ghost. The Marine Walt Jensen, by all accounts, was gone, disgraced, presumed dead, or captured indefinitely. Let them think that. Let them underestimate the man they had broken. They didn't know what they had unleashed. I would be a weapon from the shadows, untraceable, unbound by rules or rank. My mind, sharpened by torment and a thirst for vengeance, began to plot. Not just escape, but retribution. I studied the cell, the guards, the sparse routine. Every creak, every shadow, every shift change was cataloged. The end goal was clear, singular. Return home, unmask the traitors, and finish the job Sarah and Frank had started. This was not just about justice. It was about tearing down the architects of my destruction, brick by painful brick. The small, secluded safe house, nestled deep in the quiet farmlands of the Midwest, offered a stark contrast to the dust and chaos of the cell. Here, under Frank Riley's watchful eye, I began the slow, grinding process of recovery. My body, battered but healing, was easier to mend than my mind. I grappled with my past choices, the wreckage of my family, and the heavy moral cost of everything that had happened. The quiet hours stretched, filled with the hum of crickets and the gnawing regret of a life shattered by my own hand. Sarah was there, a constant, unwavering presence. Our relationship, forged in the brutal fires of war and betrayal, was now undeniable, a quiet truth that settled between us. But it was also complicated, shadowed by the ruins of my past, the ghost of Mary, and the life I had discarded. We didn't talk about it much, but it was always there, an unspoken current. The hunt was on, fueled by a cold, abiding rage. Not a reckless rampage, but a calculated, methodical dismantling. The forces that had ruined my life, that had used my affair as a weapon, would be brought down, piece by careful piece. This wasn't about blind fury, it was about precision, about cutting off the snakes' heads one by one. Frank Riley, the old partner, was a silent, solid ally. He provided resources, intelligence, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from years in the shadows. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood the dirty work of justice, operating just outside the rules. "You gotta be smarter than them, Walt," he'd often say, his eyes glinting. Smarter and colder. Sarah and I systematically tracked down those responsible for orchestrating my downfall. Not just the foreign intelligence, but the collaborators back home, the ones who benefited from discrediting Marine operations. We exposed their corruption, their double dealings, their carefully constructed lies. We moved through unofficial channels, leaking information, applying pressure where it hurt most, watching their carefully built empires crumble. Each act of vengeance, however justified, carried its own moral weight. Was I truly finding justice, or merely perpetuating a cycle of violence, becoming the very thing I fought against? The question lingered, a bitter taste. Frank, with his network, brought me news of Mary. She had moved back to her sisters in Ohio, raising the kids alone. The struggles she faced, the quiet humiliation, the children caught in the crossfire of my selfish choices. A deep sorrow settled in my chest, a profound ache for the damage I had caused. There was no undoing that. General Hayes slowly, painstakingly came to understand the manipulation. The shame of being unwittingly complicit, of allowing his personal anger to blind him, was a heavy burden. He began to subtly aid our efforts, pulling strings behind the scenes, using his old connections to quietly clear paths, to divert attention. It wasn't redemption, not really, but a man trying to do right, however late. I knew my old life was truly gone. The Walt Jensen who lived in the cabin near Leadville, the Marine with the clear-cut path and the quiet wife, was dead and buried. There was no going back to that man, to that sense of ordered purpose. The landscape of my life had been scorched earth. Sarah and I stood on a new, uncharted path, a partnership forged in war and betrayal, now looking for some semblance of peace. What our future held, we didn't know, but we would face it together. The price, but while I sought revenge, the story wasn't about a triumphant return. I had paid a heavy price in loss, in reputation, in moral integrity. The scars were permanent. Sarah's loyalty, I understood, wasn't naive devotion. It was a deep, earned bond, forged in the crucible of shared hell, transcending the initial contempt I'd held for her. The revenge wasn't explosive. It was a slow, quiet dismantling. One by one, the enemies were exposed, their careers ruined, their influence shattered. Broken, much like I had been. I stood on the porch of Frank's safe house, looking out over a quiet Midwestern landscape, the vast fields stretching to the horizon. I contemplated the choices that had led me here, the people I lost, and the unlikely, hard-won understanding found in the most unexpected place. Can a man truly outrun his past? Or does the weight of his choices forever define the road ahead? The story ends not with triumph, but with a quiet, hard-won understanding of the enduring cost of infidelity and betrayal. The Midwest Safe House became our command center, a quiet haven where the meticulous work of dismantling a conspiracy unfolded. Sarah and I finalized our desperate plan. It wasn't about bullets and explosions this time. It was about information, carefully timed, strategically leaked. We aimed for the heart of it, the highest-ranking betrayer, the man whose greed and ambition had allowed the foreign faction to fester within our own ranks. The operation was executed with surgical precision. Frank, moving like a phantom through old contacts and forgotten networks, planted the seeds. A series of encrypted files, incriminating financial records, and authenticated communications found their way into the hands of a few trusted, anonymous journalists. The initial ripple was small, a quiet tremor, but we knew it would grow. The reveal, when it finally broke, sent shockwaves. General Miller, a man Walt had saluted, a decorated officer, was exposed as the key conspirator, selling intelligence for profit, discrediting operations to benefit his shadowy partners. The news hit like a grenade in the sterile halls of power. Public disgrace, a swift court-martial, professional ruin. It was a quieter end than a bullet, but perhaps more agonizing for a man who valued reputation above all else. Watching it unfold from the secluded safety of Frank's farmhouse, Walt felt a hollow victory. There was no elation, no sense of triumph. The enemies were brought down, their web of deceit unraveled, but the immense cost of his own choices remained. The charred remains of his cabin, the distant, aching silence from Mary, the fractured trust in his eyes when he looked in a mirror. That price was paid in full, and no amount of justice could resurrect what was lost. Sarah stood by his side, a silent anchor. She understood. Not with words, but with her presence, with the quiet intensity in her violet eyes. She saw the complex, damaged man I had become, the soldier whose moral compass had been violently recalibrated, and she didn't flinch. Her understanding was a balm, a quiet acceptance that spoke volumes. General Hayes, his pride wounded, his faith shaken, acknowledged his manipulation. He reached out, not with an apology, but with an offer of discreet aid. He used his remaining influence to quietly clear Walt's official record of certain charges, creating just enough ambiguity to prevent a full-blown military manhunt, turning Walt from a disgraced soldier into a ghost, an untraceable asset. "You're still young," he'd said to Sarah in a hushed call. "You need a reliable man." It was his way of acknowledging their bond, of offering a quiet blessing to their impossible path. Walt and Sarah discussed their uncertain future. A normal life, a suburban house, a 9 to 5. It was a fantasy, a relic from another lifetime. They were both too far gone, too deeply scarred by the shadows they had walked through. "We ain't built for normal, Walt," Sarah said one evening, looking out at the endless cornfields. "Not anymore." They began to consider new roles, operating in the fringes, in the shadows, using their unique skills for justice, for truth, for whatever quiet good they could salvage. The immediate threat was neutralized, the specific conspiracy dismantled, but a true sense of peace remained elusive. The world was still a dangerous place, full of new shadows and new betrayals. Walt continued to grapple with the moral ambiguity of his actions. Was he a hero, a rogue agent, or just a man who had broken everything he touched, now trying to put some pieces back in their proper place? He accepted his new identity, a man forever changed by war, by infidelity, by betrayal, and by the brutal, unforgiving process of seeking retribution. Their bond deepened, forged not just in shared trauma, but in shared purpose, and an understanding that transcended words. They were two broken people, finding a strange, hard-won solace in each other's presence. The narrative emphasized that even completed revenge brought no true solace, only a quiet, weary satisfaction that justice, however flawed, had been served. They began preparing for a life lived on the fringes, always vigilant for new threats, for new enemies that might emerge from the darkness. The road ahead was long, uncertain, but they would walk it together. The sun dipped low over the endless fields of the Midwest, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Sarah stood beside me, our silhouettes long against the horizon. My old life, the cabin, Mary, the routine of what I once considered normal, it was all irrevocably gone. The ache for it was a permanent fixture, a quiet hum beneath everything else. True peace, the kind you read about, felt forever out of reach. I was a ghost now, a weapon honed by betrayal and war, operating from the shadows. Sarah, my partner in every sense, walked this path with me. Our bond wasn't the kind you could name, not simple romance, but something deeper, forged in fire and shared understanding. The weight of my choices, the damage I inflicted, especially on Mary and the kids, was a constant companion. Vengeance had brought a cold sense of completion, but no solace. The road ahead was long, fraught with unseen threats, a perpetual vigilance that defined our new kind of duty. Perhaps in this shared fight for a twisted version of justice, I found an unlikely form of redemption. We looked out at the fading light, two figures against a vast, indifferent world. There was no triumph, no grand victory dance, just the quiet, enduring realism of two people who understood the enduring cost of infidelity and betrayal.